"You're my man now," the mud-streaked woman said, reaching up to pull the red neckerchief from Desmond Keller's throat, while 3 wolves closed through the creek. Before he could decide whether she was fevered or simply dangerous, she knotted it around her wrist and hoofbeats struck the ridge above them. Men were coming for her, the wolves were not yet gone. And she had made him her husband without asking his name. Desmond braced his Winchester across her body and lowered himself between her bruised knees and the creek. The nearest wolf came through the shallows, with its head low yellow eyes fixed on the blood darkening her torn petticoat. Rainwater ran from Desmond's hair into his collar. His left hand stayed on the rifle's fore end. His right rested near the woman's shoulder, not touching, ready to hold her down if pain made her rise at the wrong moment. "Don't shoot unless you must," she whispered. Her breath snagged, but her brown eyes stayed fierce. "The riders will hear. They already have." He fired into the shale a foot ahead of the lead wolf. Water grit and splintered stone struck its muzzle. The animal recoiled. Desmond worked the lever and stood with the barrel steady while the other 2 paced behind it, uncertain now. The lead wolf bared its teeth once, then turned for the pine timber. The pack followed. The woman's fingers tightened around the red wool at her wrist. Above the creek, tack creaked. A man dismounted near the overturned stage boot. Another kicked loose stones down the ravine. Desmond looked at the woman at last. Her right ankle was swelling beneath a torn boot. Mud covered one cheek. She had lost a sleeve button and most of the pins from her hair, yet there was nothing helpless in the way she held his gaze. "You know those men, I know what they think they own." That wasn't my question. It's the answer that matters. She pushed herself higher against the granite and pointed one dirty finger at his chest. "Lon Parrish has a labor paper with my name on it. He says I owe passage board and the coat he put over my shoulders in Prescott. If he finds me alone, he'll drag me back to Salt Creek. If he finds me with a husband, he'll have to make his claim in front of witnesses. And you settled on me. You were standing here. That is a poor measure of character. You didn't run when the wolves came." A boot scraped on the ledge. Desmond shifted half a step, hiding her behind his coat, and the deadfall lodged against the bank. He had spent 6 years guiding survey parties through the high Arizona country. He knew the kind of silence that frightened men more than shouting, and he knew Lon Parrish had never met a debt he could not turn into a chain. Keller Parrish called. "You tracking stock, or did you find my runaway?" Desmond kept his rifle angled toward the creek. "Found a mare with a torn back and a cracked shoe." Parrish came to the edge of the shale. Rain dripped from his beaver hat onto his gray beard. 2 stagehands stood behind him with carbines loose in their hands. "The woman jumped from the boot when the axle split," Parrish said. "Retta Tanner. Contracted for stable and household work. She owes me $40. Beside Desmond's boot, Retta's breathing thinned. Her hand did not shake. "I don't see $40 in this creek," Desmond said. "You see my worker." Cold anger rose in Desmond. 16 years had passed since his father put his sister's name on a paper and called it necessity. Yet Parrish still said worker the way another man said mule. "She's bound to me," Desmond said. Parrish stopped. For the first time, his eyes found the red scarf around Retta's wrist. "Since when does a line scout take a bride out of a ravine?" "Since," she asked. Retta's fingers closed around the scarf so hard her knuckles paled. Parrish looked from the rifle to Desmond's face. He knew Desmond did not boast, and he knew Desmond's quietest voice usually came before somebody made a sensible choice. "You're buying trouble, Keller. I told you. I'm not buying anything. She'll leave you before winter. That will be her decision." One of the stagehands shifted his carbine. Desmond raised the Winchester no more than an inch. It was enough. Parrish spat into the creek. "Bring her to the station by noon tomorrow, or you lose the southern route." Desmond did not answer. Parrish waited, hoping for fear or bargaining, and then turned and climbed back to the road. The two men followed. Hoofbeats moved through the timber until the creek swallowed the sound. Desmond remained where he was for 3 long breaths. Then he lowered the rifle. He's gone. Retta did not release the scarf. You can let go of my clothing now. I am considering whether your character has improved. It has not. That almost made her smile. The expression came and vanished so quickly he might have imagined it. My name is Retta, she said. I gathered that. And I do not owe you $40. I did not ask for it. He held out his forearm. He did not pull her up. She studied the offered arm, then used it to rise by her own strength. Pain crossed her face when her right foot touched stone. Desmond tightened his stance, but kept his hands where she could see them. The mare, she asked. Tied below the bend. Then we move before Parrish changes his mind. You have a bad ankle. I have a worse alternative. Desmond looked at the red scarf on her wrist, at the knot she had tied, while wolves circled and men hunted her, and understood that she had not claimed him out of foolishness. She had seized the only piece of ground left to her. He picked up her torn carpet bag and slung it over his shoulder. Retta lifted one brow. I thought you said you weren't buying anything. I'm carrying a bag. See that you remember the difference. He did. The line shack stood 2 miles above the Copper Wells Road, built of pine logs and riverstone. 2 saddle horses watched Desmond lead the injured mare into its leaning corral. Retta refused to enter the shack until the mare's back had been washed. Desmond brought warm water while she worked her fingers through the animal's matted coat. The raw place beneath the harness was broad and angry. Retta's mouth hardened when she saw it. Parrish's driver used a collar made for a heavier team, she said, then blamed her for fighting it. You know horses. I know what happens when pain is called disobedience. The words landed harder than she appeared to intend. Desmond looked at her bent head, at the careful way she cleaned the mare without touching the wound twice, and felt his first opinion of her shift. She was not merely stubborn. She was exact. Inside were 1 iron cot, labeled 2 chairs, and a shelf of plain provisions. Retta set down her torn carpet bag. Where will you sleep in the tack shed? You needn't sleep with mice because I borrowed you for an hour. The mice and I have an agreement. They stay out of my boots, and I do not ask where they spend Sunday. This time she smiled properly. It changed her face so completely that Desmond forgot the next thing he meant to say. He recovered by setting a coffee pot on the table. You have 3 roads, he said. First, you stay hidden until the Prescott coach leaves Friday. I tell Parrish you went east. I did not come this far to hide in another man's room. Second, you take my spare bay enough money for food and a map to the New Mexico line. I would still be riding away from work I earned. Third, we go into Copper Wells together. We let the town believe you are my promised wife long enough to keep Parrish from laying hands on you in an alley. Claggett needs a horse trainer. You earn your own money and decide where you go after that. Retta's gaze moved to the window. Copper Wells lay below in the late sun, a crooked row of gray roofs and red tracks between them. Why the 3rd road, she asked. It costs you more than the others. Desmond took off his hat. He rarely spoke of his sister. My sister Annie signed a labor paper in Missouri when she was 19. My father needed money. The rancher who took her near Fort Worth called her passage a debt, and her wages an inconvenience. She died of lung fever before he decided a doctor was worth the cost. Retta turned slowly. I was 16, Desmond said. Too young to stop it. Old enough to remember every word my father used to excuse it. He expected pity and found none. Retta looked at him as if he had placed something breakable on the table, and she knew better than to touch it without leave. Then we take the third road, she said. But I work under my own name. That was the point. And your scarf stays with me until Parrish quits asking questions. That seems to be the part of the arrangement you enjoy most. It is the cleanest thing I own. At dawn, Retta discovered Desmond's coffee. She swallowed, once looked into the tin cup, and said, "This could take rust off a plow. It keeps a man awake. It may keep him embalmed." He took the cup from her, drank without blinking, and set it down. Breakfast is bacon. You may criticize that after you eat it. Her bacon came out better than his. He disliked how much pleasure she took in proving it. He disliked more how quickly the shack sounded inhabited. Copperwells noticed them before they reached the livery. Mrs. Vale paused with a broom in her hands. 2 freight men stopped unloading flour. A church widow studied the red scarf around Retta's wrist, then hurried toward the mercantile with the news. Desmond rode beside Retta rather than ahead. He kept his hands loose on the reins. She sat his spare bay with a light seat despite her swollen ankle. And when the horse shied at a loose wagon board, she settled him with 2 fingers and a quiet word. Old Claggett met them at the livery doors with a cold pipe between his teeth. "You bring me another stray Keller, she brings herself." Retta dismounted without help, though Desmond placed himself close enough to catch the stirrup if her ankle failed. She noticed. She said nothing. Claggett's gaze dropped to the Parrish mare behind them. That animal kicked through a stall wall last month. She had reason, Retta said. Within an hour, she stood in the main aisle with the chestnut on a long cotton line. She used no crop. She did not pull the bit. When the mare crowded her, Retta made her move. When the mare yielded, Retta released the pressure at once. Desmond watched from the forge. The horse's breathing changed first, then its ears softened. Finally, it followed Retta through a turn with the line hanging slack. Claggett removed the pipe from his mouth. "My nephew lost skin to that mare." "Your nephew tried to win an argument with both hands," Retta said. "My nephew is not bright. Then the mare has already trained one of you." Claggett barked a laugh. Desmond looked down before Retta could catch his own. She did catch it. For one brief second, her eyes met his across the aisle. The fierce woman from the creek was still there, but something warmer had appeared beside the fierceness. Claggett offered her 5 young horses for the Friday remount sale, $2 a head, and another $half for any back she had to doctor. Retta asked for a room above the tack shed and the right to refuse a horse too lame to work. "You bargain like a widow with 6 children," Claggett grumbled. "I bargain like a woman who knows what work costs. 5 head the loft and your own key." Retta held out her hand. Claggett took it. Desmond felt an absurd pride that had no place in his chest. He had only stood where Retta could use the ground. That should have been enough. By noon, he wanted to hear her laugh again. The next 3 days found a rhythm neither of them named. Retta worked the remount horses from first light until the heat drove everyone into shade. Desmond repaired harnesses, trimmed a saddle tree for the chestnut, and rode the north draws looking for 2 geldings Claggett hoped to buy. At supper, they ate on overturned grain tubs behind the livery. Retta complained that Desmond cut bread as if every loaf had insulted him. Desmond told her she trained horses with more patience than she buttered biscuits. She threw a crust at his hat. He kept it. The red scarf remained tied at her wrist during the day. At night, she folded it beside the wash basin. Each time Desmond saw it, he remembered the pressure of her fingers in the ravine and the strange certainty with which she had chosen him out of all the possible men in the world, even if only because he had been nearest. He began timing his work, so he returned before she closed the stable. He blamed Claggett's loose-haltered bay and the chance of Parrish returning. The real reason was the small square of lamplight in the loft window. On Thursday evening, Desmond sat below it, shaping a cedar peg for a harness rack. Retta appeared at the hay door, sleeves rolled above her elbows. "You have been sitting there for 2 hours. The bay in stall 4 is a thief. He is asleep. He is a patient thief." She lowered herself onto the platform, boots dangling above the alley. Parrish came at noon. Desmond's knife stopped. He offered me $30 to sign a paper saying I left his service by choice and took the mare. What did you say that $30 would not pay for the damage his harness did? Desmond resumed shaving the peg, though the blade no longer moved cleanly. Retta watched him. "He said you lost the southern route because of me. The southern route is 60 miles of alkali and bad company. Desmond." It was the first time she used his given name. The sound of it in her voice made him look up. "Claggett told me Parrish threatened to cut his hay credit if you stayed on as a line scout. Claggett buys from 2 other ranches. That does not answer me." "No." Desmond folded the knife. "I lost the route." Retta's face tightened. "You should have told me, so you could do what, go back and make my decision cheaper, so I could know the cost." He stood. A harder answer rose in him, the sort he used when men pressed too close. He let it die before it reached his mouth. "My sister's paper taught me one thing," he said. "A favor that demands obedience is only a debt wearing a clean shirt. I will not use what Parrish costs me to tell you where to stand." Retta went very still. Desmond wished suddenly and sharply that he had said less, or more. He wanted to tell her that the loss did not frighten him half as much as the thought of returning from a ride and finding the loft window dark. He wanted to ask whether she would miss him if he left first. Instead, he respected the narrow piece of freedom she had fought for and kept the wanting behind his teeth. Retta looked toward the stable aisle. "I washed your scarf." It hung over his saddle horn clean and mended the frayed end trimmed square. "You repaired it. It was coming apart. So was your sleeve. You left that alone. My sleeve did not stand between me and me." He glanced up at her. She had not meant it as a confession. The color rising along her cheek told him so. Yet the words remained between them, warmer than the lamplight. "Thank you," he said. "Do not make much of it. I would not dare." When he turned toward the tack shed, she called his name again. "Desmond," he stopped. "If you buy horses for Claggett, will you stay in Copper Wells?" He looked at the dark stable, the red scarf, and the woman waiting above him. For 6 years staying had meant weather catching him, wages running short, or a horse going lame. It had never meant being wanted. "If the work is honest," he said, "I might." Retta nodded once. "Then I hope Claggett has sense enough to hire you." He carried that hope into the tack shed and slept badly because of it. Friday dawned cold and bright. The remount pens at the edge of town filled with ranchers, soldiers from Fort Apache, freight drivers, and townspeople eager to see someone else risk a broken arm. 4 young horses stood in the holding pen. The chestnut waited in the ring with a light saddle Desmond had fitted to spare her heeling back. Retta stood at the mare's shoulder. Her braid lay down the center of her dark wool dress. She wore no red scarf now. Desmond found it tied around the horn of his saddle outside the rail. That small change unsettled him more than Parrish's arrival. Lon Parrish rode into the yard with 2 deputies behind him. He wore his best coat and the expression of a man who expected the town to mistake money for law. The chestnut felt the crowd and danced sideways. Retta gave her room, then asked for the turn again. No whip, no fight. The mare bent around her hand and came back to stillness. A Fort Apache lieutenant leaned toward Claggett. That the stage mare was, Claggett said. Now she has manners. So does the horse, Retta called without looking over. Laughter moved through the crowd. Even the lieutenant smiled. Parrish did not. "That mare carries my brand," he shouted. "And the handler is under contract to my line. Any sale is theft." The yard quieted. Retta walked the chestnut to the rail. Her injured ankle still made her step uneven, but she did not hide it. "I worked 12 weeks in your Prescott yard," she said. "You took $37 from my wages for passage before you sent me toward Salt Creek. I owe $3." She placed $3 on the rail. Parrish's mouth pulled tight. "You owe board clothing medicine and the damage to my coach. The axle failed before I touched the door. You jumped with my mare. I led an injured animal out of a ravine after your men left her." The lieutenant looked at the healing harness sore. So did both deputies. Retta did not reach for the folded receipt in her pocket. Desmond knew it was there, but she understood what mattered. The crowd had seen the mare under Parrish's gear. They saw her now calm beneath Retta's hand. No paper could speak as plainly. Parrish nudged his horse closer. "You think 5 days in a livery makes you free?" Retta's chin lifted. "No. I was free before I reached your station. 5 days here only gave this town time to notice." Something changed in the men at the rail. Claggett straightened. The lieutenant stepped nearer. Mrs. Vale, who had come in her black bonnet, folded her arms with the severe approval of a woman prepared to remember every word. Parrish's hand dropped toward his holster. Desmond was over the rail before the glove touched iron. He did not draw. He caught Parrish's bridle just below the bit and turned the horse's head away from Retta. The gelding sidestepped, forcing Parrish back in the saddle. "Take your hand off my horse," Parrish said. "Take yours away from the gun." The deputies moved apart, no longer standing behind Parrish so much as watching him. Desmond's anger had heat now, but it did not own him. He could have pulled Parrish from the saddle. A younger version of him would have enjoyed it. Instead, he held the bridle long enough for the threat to pass, then released it and stepped aside. He looked at Retta, not Parrish. "The ring is yours," he said. It was the only thing she needed from him. Retta turned to the lieutenant. "You came to see remounts." Watch the mare. She mounted from the rail without assistance. The chestnut tensed and then settled under her. Retta took her once around the ring at a walk, once at a trot, then guided her between 2 swinging canvas sheets Claggett's nephew had hung from poles. The mare hesitated at the first flap. Retta waited. The horse breathed, lowered her head, and went through. The crowd broke into. The lieutenant called for the quartermaster's clerk. "Fort Apache will take the 4 geldings and contract Miss Tanner to school 6 more. Payment in her name." Parrish stared at Retta. He had expected a frightened debtor, then a troublesome woman, then a spectacle he could shame. What stood before him was a horsewoman with a buyer witnesses, and a town suddenly ashamed of how easily it had believed him. Retta dismounted and came back to the rail. "The $3 are yours," she said. "Nothing else is." Parrish swept the coins into the dirt with his glove. Retta did not bend to retrieve them. Desmond did. He picked up each coin, wiped off the dust, and placed them in Parrish's open palm. Then he closed Parrish's fingers over them. "Now the whole town has seen you paid," Desmond said. "Spend it somewhere else." For one dangerous second, Parrish looked ready to strike. Desmond hoped he would not, though a less honorable part of him disagreed. Parrish saw the deputies, the soldiers, Claggett's forge hammer resting within reach, and Retta standing without fear. He jerked the reins and rode out. The crowd after him, Desmond turned to Retta. "You all right?" Her eyes flashed. "You twisted his bridle. He was reaching for a gun. You might have been trampled. That horse has better judgment than Parrish." The corner of her mouth twitched. Then she looked at his hand. The knuckles were scraped where the bridle leather had burned them. Without asking, she took his wrist. The whole yard noticed. Retta drew a clean handkerchief from her pocket and wrapped his knuckles with the same firm care she used on a horse's wounded back. Her touch was practical. The way she kept hold of him after the knot was tied was not. "You gave the ring back to me," she said. "It belonged to you. So did the victory." "I know." Her thumb moved once across the inside of his wrist. "Good." Then she released him and turned to speak with the lieutenant about the 6 new horses. Desmond stood in the dust and understood he had trusted her strength instead of replacing it with his own. That frightened him more than the gun and felt like his first honest road in years. By late afternoon, Copper Wells had rearranged its opinion. Mrs. Vale offered Retta a larger room at the same price. Claggett offered her a third of every training fee through winter and first chance to buy into the remount pens come spring. The lieutenant left a written order for 6 horses and half the payment in advance. Retta accepted the work. She refused the larger room. "The loft is close to the stable," she said. Claggett squinted at her. "And close to Keller's tack shed. The horses are less troublesome." "Of course." Desmond bought supper at the Mercantile salt pork coffee flour and a jar of peach preserves he did not need. Retta saw the jar and raised an eyebrow. "For the shack," he said. "You told me tinned peaches were an extravagance. Preserves are different, how they come in glass." She laughed. Desmond decided the distinction had been worth making. At sunset, they rode back toward Pine Needle Creek to fetch the last of her things from the line shack. The air smelled of cedar and damp earth. Their horses moved side by side without either rider arranging it. At the Granite Hollow, Desmond stopped. The creek ran clear over the shale. The wreckage was gone. Only 2 ruts remained above, and red wool fluttered from his saddle horn. Retta looked at the rocks where he had found her. 4 days, she said. "It feels longer. It has been a difficult week for my scarf." She smiled, but the smile faded when he untied the neckerchief and laid it across her open palm. "I should give this back," he said. "You keep saying that as though it belongs entirely to you." "It did before the ravine. Many things were simpler before the ravine." He looked down at the red wool between her fingers. "Parrish is gone. Claggett gave you work. The army knows your name. You do not need a false promise anymore." Retta's face became careful. "No. I can tell the town the engagement ended." "You can?" The answer was too even. Desmond gathered his reins and turned his bay toward the road, giving her the space he had promised from the beginning. The horse took one slow step. Retta caught his wrist. "Is that what you want?" He looked at her hand around his, then at her face. "No." The creek seemed louder after that. He had lived alone by keeping his needs small. A dry blanket, a sound horse, coffee strong enough to offend Retta. He knew how to leave before a place could ask anything of him. He had almost convinced himself that was freedom. Then she had put his scarf on her wrist and made his return matter. "I do not want to end it," he said. Her grip softened, but did not release him. "I do not want to be the man you borrowed, because wolves and Parrish left you no better choice. I want to be the man you choose when there is no one chasing you." Her breath changed small but audible. He went on before courage failed. "I want to come home after the horses are fed and find you arguing with my coffee. I want to know which mare has offended you and why Claggett was wrong about it. I want to stay in Copper Wells because you are there, not because a road or a wage trapped me." Retta's eyes shone, though her chin stayed proud. "That sounds dangerously near a proposal, Keller." "It is a request. For what to court you honestly. No debt, no paper, no claim you cannot take back." For a moment, she only looked at him. Her hand remained around his scarred wrist. The red scarf lay across her other palm. In the ravine, she said, "I claimed you because I was afraid. I know. I hated that fear chose before I could." Desmond nodded. He would accept whatever came next, even if it left the road empty again. That was the cost of giving a choice back and meaning it. Retta lifted the red wool. "Today I am not afraid," she said. "Today I have wages, work, a room, and 6 horses waiting for me. I know that too." Then listen carefully. She looped the scarf around his right wrist and tied the knot slowly, not as a bandage, not as evidence, and not as a trick for watching men on a ridge. "You're my man now," she said, her voice warm and steady, "if you choose to be." Desmond looked at the knot. Then he closed his hand around hers. "I choose it." Retta's smile came softly this time. "Good. You may court me. May I sleep in my own shack? You may improve the coffee first." That was not among the terms. "It is now." He laughed, a rusty sound that startled both horses. Retta leaned toward him and pressed a brief kiss to his cheek, close enough to the corner of his mouth to leave him unable to remember any sensible reply. Then she turned her mare toward Copper Wells. Desmond rode beside her. They did not hurry. The wolves were gone. Parrish had his $3, and the road ahead belonged to neither of them alone. When the first lamplights appeared below, Retta's hand found his between the saddles. He held on, not because she had claimed him, and not because he had saved her. He held on because at last they had chosen the same way home,